We have Kara and Lindsay here today with Parsons Brinckerhoff, consulting firm in Denver. They'll give us a little more background on what they do day to day, and the big reason they're here is to go through sustainability of roadway, transportation, bridge projects. I think we do a lot of things well already as a group, but I think the mission and vision from city manager and the council is we can do better. So hopefully today we get some ideas, concepts, ways to benchmark and really take a look at what we're doing in the big picture. And like I said, I feel like we do a lot of things well already. It's just a matter of learning some more resources, some more tools. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. Anything else, get some popcorn. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Okay, thanks. Well, as Tim said, I'm Kara Swanson with Parsons Brinckerhoff. I've been with PB just about 5 years. My primary focus right now is doing NEPA documentation and managing those tasks for transportation projects. Before that, I lived and worked in Illinois and worked in the public and private sector as a wetland scientist.
And I'm Lindsay Souza with the Denver office, and I'm an urban planner. I work on land use planning, complete streets projects, transit-oriented development projects, and sustainability projects, kind of a whole diverse array of projects. I've been with the company for 6 years. So I can back up and tell you a little bit about Parsons Brinckerhoff. As Tim mentioned, we're based out of the Denver office. We have 150 engineers, planners, design visualization specialists, all across the board, full service firm. And nationally, globally, we have 13,000 employees. And we pride ourselves on being a leader in sustainability and infrastructure, and have been embarking on a number of initiatives in that respect for a while. Back in 2007, which, believe it or not, is kind of a long time ago in the world of these infrastructure rating systems, and you'll see why, we worked for AASHTO nationally on a highway sustainability checklist. We're also giving presentations nationally on climate change. As we know, that's a rapidly evolving area of work, and so we have, led by Cindy Burbank out of our DC office, giving some guidance on climate change. We give context-sensitive solutions training, and then also a concept that we've coined here recently called contextually complete streets, which is kind of the melding of context-sensitive solutions and complete streets together and applying that to projects. And then on the technical side, we've developed a tool to measure carbon emissions called Carbon Fit. And it's basically a land use scenario planning tool that looks at potential carbon emissions from different land use and transportation scenarios. And we've been applying that most recently to Tyson's Corner in Virginia. So I don't need to review the definition of sustainability, but I just want to mention that PB really focuses on the triple bottom line of social, environmental, and economic as the three fundamental components of sustainability, and we integrate that in the projects that we work on. So why incorporate sustainability? We really feel like sustainability shouldn't be just a side item in a project, that we really have to think about it from beginning to end, and it makes for a more holistic project and approach, especially when you think about life cycle costs, maybe making an upfront investment, but looking at the return over time. And so that's really how we like to approach projects.
So today's presentation, that was just a little bit of background, but we're really going to focus on the green metric systems nationwide that are either well established, meaning since 2007, or are in the process of, like FHWA and ASCE, working through their sustainability systems. And then we'll talk about 14th Street reconstruction project that PB led the design for in Denver. And we actually did an internal research project and applied several of these rating systems to that project. We'll give you a system overview of several of the nationwide systems and one of the state systems that's established. Then it's kind of open to discussion for next steps as to where Fort Collins wants to go. And so does transportation need a sustainability measurement system? And these quotes, I won't read them back to you, but they were from a paper regarding this topic. And I think it's something that has really been discussed across the board, because we have LEED, which Lindsay can speak to a lot more, but that really transportation is only a very small part of that in the different LEED categories, and you can expand on.
Yeah, I mean, there's we know there's LEED systems evolving. LEED for neighborhood development is one of the most recent ones, and transportation is definitely part of that, and we can pull some credits out of that that relate to transportation. But a lot of entities out there are saying, do we need a LEED for infrastructure, a LEED for transportation system? And some of these quotes here kind of speak to support behind that agencies need metrics to measure sustainable transportation.
So right now we're kind of experiencing, and we've been noticing this across the country, it's kind of a race to the top. There is no one system that has emerged as a front runner where most agencies or most states or federal government is using. So right now at the national level we have green roads, which I think Tim had spoken about and mentioned before. We have the FHWA Sustainable Highway System, which is just coming online in a testing phase. The ASCE, ACEC, APWA system, which is in infrastructure, it's a much broader system, and that's still under development. There hasn't been anything released on that yet. STEED is actually a system designed by Lochner, a consulting firm. And then there's STARS, which I think Lindsay can speak about a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. STARS is a system being developed out of Oregon, and I believe it's still in the testing phase, but this is an infrastructure rating system that kind of steps back and allows you to evaluate, compare different alternatives. Some of these systems, like green roads, are meant for when you're already in the design process and you have a preferred option and you're moving forward. Whereas something like STARS is kind of a broad scale decision-making tool between alternatives. So, and we'll get into each of these a little bit more.
And then at the state level, the best established one is green lights out of the New York State DOT. There's ILAST, which I think just came on board in the last year, and that's actually modeled off of green lights. And then there's also Wisconsin Highway Construction Rating System, and I know other states are also developing them currently. So the primary differences that we've noticed working through these systems, the biggest one is probably an independent review versus self-evaluation. Green Roads it's a third-party entity. You do a lot of documentation. There's a lot of steps that you have to work through. You submit everything to them, they review it, and then they certify your project. Whereas a self-evaluation like Green Lights or FHWA, we see a lot more public agencies using those, and a project manager will sit down with their project, take it through a simple checklist, and then certification is based on that, which really goes into the level of flexibility and documentation. Green roads, there's not a lot of flexibility. I mean, you can choose certain credits that you choose to pursue, but in terms of documentation, you have to submit a certain level of documentation for it. Whereas green lights, and Lindsay will touch on it more later, it's, did you do this? Yes or no? And it's so it's kind of comparing apples and oranges. It really depends on what the goal of it is and who's using it. Rated versus unrated. The only unrated system that we're aware of is STEED. And this question came up. I watched a presentation by Lochner. Why would you have a system that doesn't assign ratings or certification? And I guess the client, whoever they were designing it for, didn't want people just kind of scrounging for credits and just trying to, minimally do things just to get to a certain level. And so I think they're kind of still debating that back and forth, because I think a lot of people don't see a point in, why would we be super sustainable if we're not going to get, at the highest level? So I think that's still in discussion. And then cost, Lindsay can talk a little bit more about just the cost to actually pursue these systems. Do you want to talk about cost?
Cost.
The cost to actually work through the systems.
Oh, okay. So it's really hard to pinpoint that, and I feel like we get this question a lot, which is how much does it cost for an agency to work through a system? And it all depends on a lot of things, like the complexity of the project, and it's hard. It's kind of like going through a LEED process, right? You don't know at the beginning how much it'll cost, but we as PB, and I'll explain this in the next few slides, have taken on an internal research basically initiative to take a test project which is 14th Street in Denver, and take it through all these systems. And so we can attach a price tag in a sense to some of these. I mean, we went through green roads, which in our mind is the most intensive, and that was about $15,000 to $20,000 to take it through the process. And then there's also fees to to actually pay green roads to certify your project. Whereas these online checklists that are coming out may take 3 or 4 hours of time. So, I mean, it's kind of across the board in the cost to actually administratively work through this with a team of experts, and then also to pay these entities. Someone like ASCE, ACEC, I mean, these entities are doing this because there's, I think, a price tag attached to it. I mean, I think just like USGBC, you know, kind of gets that money back. So,
and I think just from experience working through green roads, once you've done it once, it's not nearly as expensive the second and third time you go through it, because there's a steep learning curve with all the amount of documentation you have to read and then fill out.
So we can talk a little bit about the 14th Street project. So this is kind of our beta test project. It's a mile-long stretch of 14th Street through downtown Denver, a reconstruction project. The client is the city of Denver. The project involves removal of a general purpose lane to become a flex lane so that it's parking in off-peak hours and a through lane in peak hours. And then addition of a bicycle lane and much wider sidewalks. And this is all in an effort, the city recognizes that this street is kind of, quote, an ambassador street, kind of the front door to the theater district of downtown. So we kind of saw this project as embodying a number of sustainable elements and thought we would take these different systems through it. So our research is comparing, as I said, using 14th Street to compare green roads, green lights, FHWA, and I'm just going to call it the ASC system because this is so many words. So we have taken these systems through over the last year, and then we also felt it was important in our research to kind of have an independent third-party review our work. And so we've have a partnership with Dr. Michael Meyer of Georgia Tech, and he and his grad students are kind of reviewing our submittals and giving us feedback on that. And so I should also note, this is interesting, that the city of Denver is potentially going to take green roads a little bit farther and actually submit it for certification to green roads. So construction has just started on 14th Street, so we're working with the contractor to document all of the credits, and there's quite a bit of work on our end to get everything pulled together. But the city may or may not, they're not sure, but they may go ahead and move forward with certification. So just wanted to note that.
One other thing to note, the reason that PB is doing this, and I don't know if you're going to touch on that later, but because there is no front runner system out there right now, we kind of want to become as well versed, or experts, I guess, in all the systems that are out there right now that different people are using, or, you know, a lot of people are basing state systems on green light. So I think the best thing that, you know, we're trying to do right now is become well versed in all of them. So if somebody does choose to pursue, if a client chooses to pursue green roads, we can either help them with that or develop their own system, or if it's even not using a system and just incorporating sustainability measures into a project at low cost. You know, I think those are our goals to get out of this research project. So. As far as national systems go, the ones that we'll talk about in detail are Green Roads, FHWA system, and the ASCE system. Green Roads, this was initiated in 2007. It is a partnership between the University of Washington, led by Professor Steve Mensch, and CH2M Hill. There have been multiple versions of it put out, and finally the most recent version, 1.0, was published in January of last year. Right now, they're still accepting projects in the pilot project phase, so they haven't officially certified any projects yet, and we submitted 14th Street as a pilot project. There are 11 project requirements. You have to meet those credits, otherwise they won't, you know, they won't continue to review your application if you've chosen not to do some of those. There's 37 voluntary credits, and then you can get up to 10 points for custom credits that you design yourself. So the Green Roads process, we've had a lot of conversations with Steve when he's been in town and over email about the submittal format. We submitted ours. We put together a big report with appendices of all supporting documentation. Eventually, his goal is to have an online submittal, so you don't have to mail him, you know, a big packet, and they don't have to review a paper copy, and then certification would basically happen online. He also wants to form a 501(c) and have a board of directors for that would change out every 2 to 3 years. So if there were people from private companies on it, it wouldn't become, you know, a PB system, or, you know, it wouldn't be tied to one consulting firm or one agency. And he even said, like, I'm ready to step down. I want someone else to take this over. So I think his goal is to keep it rotating. Estimated fees, this is also something that has evolved over time. Originally they had set fees. I believe it was several $1,000s to get it certified, and now what they're basing it on is 0.1% of the project cost with a maximum. Once the review process is complete, a score is assigned, and your project is some level of certification, hopefully. And these are just the different levels of certification. They're certified silver, gold, and evergreen. You can see the point ranges at the bottom. You have to meet all project requirements, and then it's 30 to 60% of the voluntary credits to get a certain level of certification. These are the different point categories. In addition to the project requirements, there are 6 other categories. You can read them here with the description. Access and equity, the reason that is bolded is because that has the highest number of points that you could get. That's the highest number for the category. And we actually did fairly well in the 14th Street project with the access and equity one.
Yeah, and we'll walk through each of these categories in the next few slides and kind of give you a sense of some of the sample credits under each of those broad level categories.
And some of the challenges and things that we faced working through some of these. So these are just a few of the 11 project requirements. One thing that I noticed, the life cycle cost analysis, that was something we hadn't worked through even as a firm before. And I think it's something that Steve, I think a lot of companies will go through, like, yes, asphalt and concrete, which one is going to cost more in the long run, and they'll do their own analysis, but actually using the real cost software, that was a steep learning curve for us, and having to work with the engineers and work through that. Educational outreach, there are 8 elements you can choose out of, and so we chose 3. I think we chose, or maybe 4. One of them is presenting at a conference. You present about your project in Green Road, so Lindsay will be presenting at the NAEP conference this spring. And then also we have plans sometime, once this is all complete, to go speak to either elementary or junior high schools, kind of a broad view of sustainability and what it is and how it can apply to, roads and trains and bikes and all of that. And another thing to note is a lot of these things are taken care of kind of upfront in a project, like a noise mitigation plan or a quality control plan. I don't know if you had.
Yeah, I mean, I think the assumption on the side of Green Roads was that a lot of these plans or these project requirements are things you're already doing, and some of them are. Like a stormwater management plan is one of the credits we didn't list here. Waste management plan, noise mitigation plan, these would all be things that you would think about and sit down with the contractor on. But others of these, like the life cycle cost analysis, are not things you would necessarily do. So it's kind of been this dialogue with Green Roads about, the fact that these are actually pretty strict and intensive.
Oh, and just you don't need to go back. But the environmental review process, we ran into this problem too because there was no federal funding on 14th Street. And so when we originally read it, it led us to believe that we would, if there's not a NEPA process, what do we do? So, and in further dialogue with Steve, he explained that he just wants us to go through the same level of analysis, whether it's, the most minimal, like a categorical exclusion or something. He actually sent us guidance out of university, or just Washington State, that it was this checklist and questions you had to answer, and that's all he was looking for. It doesn't necessarily have to be a NEPA project to meet that. Environment and water, this was one we struggled with an urban project. It really applies much more to rural projects with things like ecological connectivity and maintaining habitat or restoring it. This right here, though, is runoff quality and runoff quantity are 2 of the credits that we were able to achieve. These are actually the AbTech ultra-urban filters that we used on the corridor to help improve water quality. And I think that might be the first time that the city of Denver actually used these types of filters. So it was actually something innovative for them, and it also helped us get that credit for that.
Access and equity is one that we scored well on because it's all those components I spoke of about the project initially, which is incorporating pedestrian access and bicycle access. We did not have transit access. This is not a bus corridor, and there is light rail crossing 14th Street, and we do have some improvements at those intersections to facilitate pedestrian movements, but we did not upgrade transit, so we did not get the points for that. But scored really well in those different point categories. Context-sensitive solutions, we wrote a white paper, which was the requirement to talk about how you've incorporated the public in the decision-making process throughout, and we definitely did that with the project. And then cultural outreach, which is essentially public art and that sort of thing, and directing 1% of your project budget to art installations, and the city has committed to doing that, so laying those out. And then the construction activities is essentially everything that the contractor would take care of during construction. So we sat down with them in the beginning to talk about implementing an environmental awareness training program, on-site recycling plan, fossil fuel use reduction. We actually thought we could do this. This is the use of biodiesel fuel, whether it's B20 up to B100. So we initially were optimistic and made that commitment, but in talking to the contractor, they won't commit to B20 fuel. and would prefer to just utilize a gas station close to the project. We found 9 stations in Denver, in the region, that provided B20 fuel, but we actually probably won't get this credit. The other one was water use tracking. So tracking water use during construction with some pretty detailed documentation of that, dates of use and purpose of use. So we're still kind of working on that one as we speak.
Materials and resources. This applies to regional materials that you see here, use of recycled materials. You know, if you're tearing up asphalt, reusing that on site. So one thing that we ran into with regional materials, there's 2 options of getting points here. One is the percent of total cost within 50 miles. So it's, you know, percent if you're using 50% concrete, and that's, you know, 50% of your total cost. Is that coming from within 50 miles or not? So we actually are going to have to redo this because we are now using more concrete than asphalt on the project. That has since changed. So we were not originally going to get that credit because the asphalt would be coming from further away, but now we'll be using concrete, which is coming from much closer, and so we might actually be able to get those points. The option 2, we did not attempt this one because it's the maximum front haul distance for each basic element of all the parts you use for construction. So on an urban road, it's not just a roadway. We have benches, we have streetlights, we have bicycle racks, and it's not just where the bike rack came from. Where did the bolts come from? Where did, you know, it's every basic part of that. Tracing it all back to where it originated from and the distance it came from, and that became extremely labor intensive. So.
And then pavement technology, we haven't seen other systems devote an entire category to pavement, but Green Roads did. And the reasoning is that a lot of other resources that we've spoken of are regulated nationally, like water quality and runoff and that sort of thing, but pavement really isn't. And it's a huge expenditure when you look at the cost of a transportation project. So they had a whole set of points around pavement. A couple of those are permeable pavement. We're using that on sidewalks, but not in the corridor. And the requirement is 50%, so we don't make the credit. We actually don't get this credit. Use of warm mix asphalt, as I think it's 50% of the total asphalt mix would be warm mix. City has not committed to doing that. I'd be curious if Fort Collins is using warm mix. And then cool pavement, and concrete kind of scores higher than asphalt.
Which I think we actually have to redo that one because we may actually get those points now too.
Right, that'll be changing.
This is just an example of, and I don't know if any of you have looked at the Green Roads manual, but I really like the way it's laid out because it's very self-explanatory. You have the goal of the credit, you have a summary of, you know, what they're looking for, you have more details, you know, background and software to use, and then it gives you the list of deliverables that you have to submit. So it's really nice just having it spelled out. Yes, you have to submit a white paper on this, or, you know, a printout from a program that you used. So Green Roads also allows for 10 points of custom credits, and of those 10 points, 5 points can be toward one idea. And so this is actually taking a credit template of theirs and writing your own credit and submitting it to them, and then it becomes applicable to multiple projects nationwide. Future projects that apply can use this custom credit. So we tried, and we've now, as Kara mentioned, we've submitted this whole deliverable to Green Roads for 14th Street to review, and they've basically said, yeah, we're not sure about what you've submitted, but we tried. Urban heat island effect, because we're planting 200 new trees along the corridor, we felt that was substantial and not reflected in other credits that are offered. They are going to work with this on this one, and we will be able to kind of reshape this into a new credit that doesn't just focus on urban heat island effect, but uses software that actually calculates tree additions. Transit safety, since we didn't get the transit credit, we were kind of spelling out what we're doing to improve transit safety at intersections, but I don't think we'll get that one. And then maintenance district, which really spoke to the innovative public-private partnership to fund and maintain this project over time, which I think Green Roads feedback on that was that it does not have a direct sustainability tie. It's a really great way to fund a project, but we're not seeing it as a sustainability tie. So the FHW Sustainable Highways tool is the next one. We'll actually be working through this in the coming months. And right now it's only available in the beta testing phase online. There are 3 different categories And when we were first working, when we were first starting to look at this, we thought it was 3 different categories where, during a planning phase of our project, during design, and then maybe during construction. But what it actually is system planning, project development, and operations and maintenance. Project development is the only one that you can take a specific project through. The other 2 are more agency-based policies, or they're much broader based. They don't apply to a single project. It's a self-scoring, voluntary program. FHWA will not mandate it for any of their projects. And you go online, and once you start going through it, you realize there's a lot of similarities to both green lights and green roads. There's a lot of overlap between them.
Well, we believe that the same entities that developed green roads developed this system. So you see a lot of overlap.
Yeah, so again, once you've worked through green roads, it becomes much easier to work through these. As I mentioned, these are the 3 different categories. The only one that's available for scoring right now is project development online. System planning, agency-wide management and planning of highway networks, and then operations and maintenance. So these are agency-wide practices, and we'll go through them in a little more detail. The system planning and operations and maintenance are available online to actually read what the credits are. You just can't go through the scoring process yet. So these are the different ways they score, and I kind of like how they did this. So whatever category you're choosing to take either a policy through or a project, it's a certain percentage of the total points to achieve one of the levels of certification. System planning, these are just a few of the credits on there. There is, in looking at the details, because it does go through the type of documentation or process you should work through to achieve this credit. Environmental management system, this is, an agency has a documented EMS for the whole agency. And it actually, the way these are scored, you can achieve the low number of points, which is if you have a documented EMS. Then you can go medium or high if you're actually tracking, the usage of that or how it's working within your agency. So the more you do with it, the more points you can get for those. This is actually it's hard to read, but a screenshot of the project development, and this is what we'll be going through. And as you click on each one, it brings up a detailed definition and description of each credit. And there's, life cycle cost analysis is on there, so that kind of triggered, when we open that up, we realize it's very similar to green roads. And then operations and maintenance, again, it's kind of policies for agency-wide things that we, again, we were not able to work through those yet.
So the ASCE, ACEC, and APWA rating system is probably the newest. They're in their pilot phase with projects, and it'll be published in 2011. So we have not seen any credits. We can't speak to any details about this system, but this one is unique. It's a compilation of professional agencies coming together to develop this, and it covers infrastructure. It's much broader than just roadways, and it's scalable, meaning that it could be the tiniest project up to a large-scale project. So it's intended to be scalable. And then they also speak to wanting to help weigh different alternatives. So versus green roads or some of these other systems where you already have your project and you're taking it through design, this one allows you to weigh different alternatives. And I think it'll be pretty similar to FHWA, especially in its format, being a web-based rating system that you just kind of fill in online.
I think one thing to note about this one too is that they've mentioned having an exam to actually be able to walk projects through this, and so you'd have to become certified, kind of like LEED. And it sounds very engineering based, which is too bad for us planners. And it sounds like they'll have different types of exams you can take to actually then be able to certify these projects and help people work through them. So it sounds much more stringent in terms of who can actually apply these systems and the other ones out there.
And all of these systems are recognizing the need for a third-party review body that serves as an independent review. So just in 2010, these agencies formed an administering organization, and they're calling it the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure, and that'll be the one that you submit projects to, and that gives you your score, so to speak. And so as I mentioned, the public availability is anticipated in the next few months. So our plan with this is to actually take 14th Street through this system. And then I don't think we've explained it. We're kind of going to come together after doing that effort and kind of compare the different systems and speak to their strengths and weaknesses and build our own base of knowledge about all of these. So state level systems, we'll just cover one, which is the one that we've taken 14th Street through, and that's green lights. Is part of the New York State DOT. It actually cannot be applied outside of New York State, but it's fully available online. You just can't submit to them. It's only for DOT projects. These are some of the other systems that look very similar to green lights because green lights is the oldest. So Illinois, Wisconsin, New Jersey, many others. So as I mentioned, the system was developed by New York State DOT, and it's basically a way for them to kind of raise the bar with their own projects internally. So project managers fill in the large checklist, which has 282 points associated with it, 180 different credits, and submits that to a review body within the DOT, and then they get feedback on their project. So it's kind of a way to increase sustainability performance over time, and it's had a lot of success in the sense that that folks are kind of internalizing this as a new way to do business, and it's kind of part of the everyday work there.
And I find it interesting that I've heard a lot of people that have worked for New York State DOT mention that green lights originally looked at green roads and kind of based their system off of that, the development of it. But when you look at the two systems, I mean, again, it's apples and oranges. So I find it interesting that green roads was kind of the starting point, and then it morphed into this entirely different sort of system.
So there's 180 different credits and 282 different points. So to get certified, by no means do you need to choose every single credit. There's definitely trade-offs in what you select to pursue. This is a system that covers planning all the way through operations. And then one element that we thought was a strength is that it really encourages innovation. And New York City has done a lot in the way of pedestrian and bicycle improvements. This system really encourages folks to look to New York City and some other manuals for ideas and awards you points on that. And these are the point certification levels. Our reaction to this, having gone through this, is that 15 points to get certified is pretty low when you have 282 possible points. And maybe that's intentional, we're not sure.
Or maybe Colorado is just so far ahead of the curve that those are things we just normally do that, you know, to achieve 15, 20, 30 points is pretty easy on the projects we've seen in Colorado, so.
And then Evergreen, which is the highest level, is 60 points, which is still only a quarter of the total possible points. So it's really interesting to kind of step back and look at these. And, you know, I kind of think about it as, are you doing the minimum to get by, to get certification, or are you really taking it farther and encouraging yourself to try brand new things on these projects? And I think that's something that I think everyone struggles with when you start putting certification levels to things. So these are the green lights categories: sustainable sites, water quality, materials and resources, energy and atmosphere, which has the highest number of points, and then innovation, which is really similar to the custom credits we spoke of earlier, where you can document some kind of extras that you're doing on your project that are not reflected in the points. I know you can't see this, but I just want to point out that this is the scorecard that you fill in. So it's kind of a workable PDF, and so the list of credits are shown on the left. It's just a sentence. There's no further manual or guidance to this. You fill in either 1 or 2 points that you believe that you have met, and then you can add a sentence or two about supporting documentation.
If you want, it's optional.
Yeah. So it's pretty. It's kind of like the other side of the spectrum in terms of documentation required. If you're comparing this system to Green Roads, which has a 400-page manual for it. I mean, this is the other end of the spectrum. But I mean, many say that this allows flexibility that you may not already have, or that you may want. So we can just cover these. So we've gone through a couple of these systems now. We're kind of looking back on what we learned from going through these systems. Many of these credits are just not part of the typical, say, NEPA document that you would go through. And if you're walking into that thinking that they are, you know, that's an investment that you have to make to actually walk through these. We were kind of disappointed that on 14th Street has all these great urban streetscape elements, but when you get down to ecological connectivity and habitat restoration, we just don't get points because we're not doing that in an urban area.
And then, well, on the flip side too, rural projects, you know, you get into the access and equity and pedestrian and bike, and you know, those may not. So you know, I guess it's a fair trade-off when you get down to it, but us working through the urban project, we want those points, you know, so it just wasn't possible.
And then that you need to work closely with all the agency and the contractor to kind of make sure that these commitments are made early on and are sustained through the life of the project. Because the submittal process is that at the end of a project is when you fill in these scorecards and submit everything. So you have to actually have all of that documentation from the contractor. And so really coordinating that, making sure that the city is you know, 100% behind this and supporting it is really important too, because it does take a financial investment.
So as far as Colorado systems, there isn't an established system out there yet in the state. I have had conversations with CDOT, and they are actually testing 2 projects, I believe up in the mountains, with green lights. One is already completed, and I believe it's already constructed, and so they took that project, that design of that, through green lights. And then they're also taking one that's currently, I believe, finishing up final design right now. They rated it in green lights at the beginning of the project, and then once construction is done, they'll take it through again. And they're really going through this whole process to see if they want to develop their own system. And one of the first things, you know, they mentioned when I talked to them was, well, yeah, it may be like green lights, but we're going to tailor it to Colorado because, again, 15 points to get certified. You know, every project would be certified, and that doesn't really show much for Colorado. So,
well, and there's a lot of benefit to that. I think I went down and spoke to the city of Peoria, Arizona, who was really interested in creating their own system because their climate down there is so different. And you know, if they're looking at green lights, which is in New York State, then there's a whole different set of parameters you have to think about with credits. And so they are potentially walking down the path of creating their own system. That's definitely an option. And then the other kind of Colorado-based system that we've seen, the city of Denver developed a checklist for all their bond projects that they're working through. And so they have a committee of different staff within the city that meet with you at the beginning of your project and then at the end of your project. And they've actually pulled a lot of credits from the LEED for New Construction manual, which some of those credits speak directly to transportation. And some of them are in green roads, like recycled materials, regional materials, that sort of thing. So since we were the consultant on 14th Street, we went in with the city's project manager before this committee presented the project, and then we'll do that again once construction is complete.
So I guess that leads us to Fort Collins, and you know, as Tim mentioned, you guys are kind of in the discussion of where you want to go and what you want to do with this. So with that, I guess if you have any questions or discussion.
It's a lot of information.
Yes.
It's a lot. So.
And we will leave the presentation with Tim, so any of you can get it. So.
I'm not really familiar with with LEED certification for buildings, but I think everyone at least knows what that is. And my impression is that's a national system consistent. So they must have similar issues with climates and environments too, I would assume, right?
Could you just rephrase the question?
Sure. So the question was with LEED, since it is a national system, there are differences in climate and points that may apply, but there is no really way, as far as I know, to tailor points based on climate. So you may just not, your project may not be applicable to certain points. And I think selfishly we were kind of thinking, well, then should the point not apply? But then it wouldn't count your total, but that's not really how it works. So.
Do they have a low threshold like you're saying these systems do too? Is LEED like that?
I would say it's a little bit more on the aggressive end. I mean, I would say out of these systems, Green Roads is pretty aggressive in their point categories. I mean, we are looking at probably a silver right now on 14th Street. You go from a certified silver, gold, evergreen, and evergreen would be a very big commitment to make.
Even to get to certified, I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into it, even to get to certified in green roads, whereas green lights is the opposite, at least for our project, was the opposite end of the spectrum. So, yes.
You mentioned the cost of administrating it. What is the added cost on the construction side of it?
That's a great question. We haven't added that up with the contractor. I mean, for us, the internal documentation side is probably around that 15 to 20,000 range. Costs that they would have, a lot of these are elements they're already doing, like water use tracking, B20 fuel would have been an added cost. I think it was 10 cents more per gallon, and we would have had to calculate that over time. What else?
I think it really depends on the credits that you choose to pursue. So if you have like a vegetation one where you can get 1 to 3 points, 1 point for using non-invasive species, 2 points for doing that and native species, and then another one species that don't require a lot of water. So I think it really depends on how you want to go and where you want to pursue it, because obviously as you get more strict with what you want to do, it's going to cost more in the construction phase of it. So.
But it sounds like you would specify those things and there wouldn't be a cost to the contractor necessarily. You would know ahead of time.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and that, I mean, that should be in the specs when it goes out, so.
Yeah, we ensured that all of the requirements were in the specs.
Could you talk more about 50% for permeable pavement? Was that the spec for green roads? Are there Colorado projects that have used that?
Well, that was the requirement from Green Roads to use 50%. And because the city of Denver has only used permeable pavement on sidewalks, not necessarily on through travel ways, the percentage just didn't add up. I don't know if other jurisdictions have utilized it in the throughway and that you could then get that credit, but it seemed high to us as a percentage. And we actually combined that strategy of permeable pavement on sidewalks with the urban inlet filters.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As kind of a combined strategy for stormwater infiltration, but adding that up, it just doesn't make the percentage. So, does that make sense?
I just didn't, yeah, it does. I was
I mean,
just curious to know. Colorado just doesn't seem like the state where you can really utilize it as much as Oregon.
Yeah, we're not aware of any other projects that have used that for roadways.
Yeah, we may not get there in the state.
I saw you guys were talking about life cycle costs for concrete and asphalt, and that's something we normally would do. And then I also saw it mentioned in terms of concrete as a local material. Is there any other kinds of points or evaluations of those two pavement types of other impacts they have, like toxicity, or obviously one's petroleum based? Is there any other credit or way of evaluating the overall impact of a pavement decision like that?
No, but that sounds like a really good custom credit.
Yeah, just always curious because that is a big decision we make on a lot.
Yeah, that was not, and I was the one that worked through the life cycle cost analysis, and there's nothing, that's very simple, like the project and all of that. So there was nothing else that came to the environmental impacts from those two types.
Is there a heat island effect credit with pavement?
Actually, you know what? There is one credit that we did not choose to pursue because you have to have experience in working through, and it's another life cycle analysis, and it's one of the voluntary credits, and it does look, I believe it looks at that. So I'd have to go back. We didn't pursue it. So.
Do you mean the monitoring of pavement every 2 years? Or
No, it was an actual one where you use software and work through. It's another life cycle assessment credit, but if you haven't used it before, you have to submit your name and phone number. So if you're the one that applied it.
Yeah, I mean that was our thinking with the trees addition and the custom credit, is that urban heat island effect, especially in an urban area, obviously would be a logical one because it could be a combination of different strategies. But Green Roads, I think, wasn't going after that philosophical idea. They felt like it was a philosophical idea and it was too broad.
That's hard to believe.
And so how do you quantify that? It's a very threshold based system. I mean, X percent of this to get this credit, and so that's a little bit too broad, I think, for them. So.
Has Denver or the contractor expressed concern with trying to manage how much water they use during construction?
Yes.
You actually just went to a meeting with
We just met with them about that because I think the Green Roads requirements are a little extensive in terms of exact dates and times of use and the purpose of use. And the contractor said that, we'll track it on a monthly basis and we'll give you the purpose of use, but how do we do that on a dates of use? So we still have to work that out with them.
The goal is not to use as much water.
Right.
So that also kind of impacts the quality of the product that you're producing.
Right, and interesting with that credit, there is no threshold. In other words, you know.
It's not if you minimize a certain amount or.
Credits just to track
It's
it.
just to track
Just
it.
to track
Tracking
it.
credit.
All right.
Yeah, there's no, you know, X% of water
Okay.
versus this. So a lot of these, I think they're still, I think there will be a version 2.0 manual, you know, that kind of lays out more. I think all of these are going to keep evolving because we've given them feedback on some of these to say some of these just don't seem realistic. And I think they value that.
Well, and that's one of the points of the pilot project phase is Steve has said many times, we want your feedback. We want to know what worked and what didn't work and what you had difficulty with. And I think one of them is the tier 4.
Right, there's a whole credit under contractor requirements that we didn't mention. It comes right after use of biodiesel fuel, and it's about it's paving emission reduction, but it's essentially using EPA Tier 4 engine retrofits on your construction equipment, and Tier 4 isn't available yet. And
We questioned Steve about that, and he said, well, yeah, you really can't get that one yet. We went, okay. Why is it in there?
It's a long-term system, right? Eventually they'll come on board, but we can't even require it, so.
Did they use warm mix, or you said they're going to construction, are they going to use warm mix asphalt?
Mm-mm.
No.
Actually, we'd be curious to know what Fort Collins view.
Didn't Loveland do some, or the county?
Loveland
There
did,
was just
Loveland
kind of
did
a pilot project.
There was a little pilot project. I thought it was in Loveland or
but
Berkeley.
we're currently not using
Yeah,
it.
we haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
No. Under your operation and maintenance, do they look at like type of the ISO you're going to use and stuff and rate it based on that or score based on that?
Well, Green Roads, for example, doesn't have that. And then Green Lights goes through operation and maintenance, but we haven't seen points related to that. No.
And again, these are great things you're bringing up for design your own credit, so I think it leaves a lot of room for innovation.
In the 14th Street project, it looked like they were doing some pedestrian scale lighting and some of those roadway lighting. Are you getting credits for using energy efficient lighting?
We are not, because we have to use the Excel standard, and I try.
It's based on foot candles.
Yeah, and the street lights actually have pedestrian lighting and then the street light, so it's one fixture, I guess. And so I tried to, write it so that, well, the pedestrian lighting is this, but when you add it together, I think it was a dark sky requirement for that. And then there's also the separate, what's the word I'm looking for? The energy efficient lighting. So, but we didn't get either one of those. We tried.
Well, we're also struggling because this is, downtown Denver with the theater district, and so the lighting is maybe more substantial than what we would have had, but that's one we couldn't get. So, probably why we're at silver, not silver green. You're pointing out the ones we didn't get.
I heard you guys were mentioning the credit for adding transit. Is that true for other alternative modes? Did you get credit for wider sidewalks and the bike lanes?
We got credit for the wider sidewalks. We went from, I think, 15 feet in some places up to 19 feet. And got credit for the bike lane. There's different variations under pedestrian access that you can get, and bicycle access. Maybe a Sharrow situation would be different than a bike lane. The bike lane has the highest number of points associated with it. But transit, they really don't break out into the mode of transit. But since we don't even have a bus route on this corridor, even putting in bus stop improvements wouldn't have applied. So.
And then is there any air quality, like a roundabout or a turn lane or anything that reduces long-term emissions? Are those in there anywhere?
Well, we didn't have to quantify, which I think is kind of a drawback to Green Roads. We didn't have to quantify air quality emissions because the use of, let's see, I'm trying to think about the air quality effects of
there's not, because I remember when we were originally doing this, they were talking about eliminating the barn stance, pedestrian movement on there, and just having, so there'd always be traffic or pedestrian movement. And so we were like, great, we can write that as a custom credit because it's going to reduce idling time. And then it ended up the city of Denver didn't go that route or wasn't ready to do that yet, so we had to give that up. So I remember there was nothing that, since we were going to do that on our own, I don't think there was anything.
It'd be a custom one.
It would have been a custom one, yeah.
So I know this is a lot of information to digest, but is it thinking that you may take projects through these different systems, or that you may walk down the path of looking at a new system tailored to the city? I mean, I don't know if
Is
you've thought
Helen
that,
still here?
thought that far.
No? Okay. Well, I would think she'd be the one to answer
Yeah.
that, but.
Well, we're getting
I don't
asked a
know.
lot if we're doing
Yeah.
green streets or
Oh, okay.
green roads.
Or
No
why
one-
we don't use LEED for
Yeah, no one knows
our
what it
projects, you know, and it's like, well, we can't really, it just
Can't
doesn't
use.
apply. So,
But
there's
there's
a lot
tons of that stuff we're
questions, yeah.
doing. We're just not accounting for it.
And
Yeah,
it's, you know, this is a really interesting time. I mean, if we came back in 6 months to you, we have a lot of updates because a lot of these systems are coming out in the next few months. And we really do feel like this is a race to the top to become the lead system or lead equivalent for transportation. I don't think USGBC has an interest in taking it on as
No,
a
Green
lead.
Roads went to them and they
Oh,
had no
okay.
interest, and Steve said he tried to meet with them and they didn't have any interest in,
So there will never be a lead streets or something. Okay, so
not right now.
Well, I have a question on in those lines too. Like, I think almost everything in there it sort of makes sense. It's sort of obvious, I guess. You either know it's better environmentally or not. But I'm just curious if you guys going through this, did you find things in there that you really didn't realize made a big impact in the sustainability of the street that were in this system, or is it more just tracking the things you already know are good to do? You
I
understand
mean, I
that
think
question?
me as a planner, a lot of the engineering stuff that I never would have thought about before, and I don't talk to a lot of engineers here, so I think looking at a lot of that, I learned it was all new to me in terms of, oh wow, this is actually sustainable. Because in first looking at it in terms of pavement and all of that, those don't necessarily occur to you or occur to me as a planner. Whereas I'm more on the environmental side with habitat and wetlands and water quality and all of that. That's much more tangible to me. So,
well, I mean, I personally think like regional materials is one where you wouldn't necessarily track that, but it is a really interesting exercise to do and to really think local about where you're getting your materials from. I'm trying to think about some of the other ones. I mean, I think pushing some innovative measures with the urban inlet filters was really kind of a catalyst with this project, and it didn't give us a lot of points per se, but it allowed for some research on some innovative stuff. I'm trying to think of any other ones that were out of the norm that we wouldn't have done.
or even just thought about, but I,
Was that a surprise to the contractor for an on-site recycling plant? No, you know, there's some things they do that with a lot. There's some things that, you know, we like almost always, you know, base course or pavements are recycled though.
well, it's funny because it's not only that, but it's also pop cans and, you know,
Right.
anything that the construction so
Yeah.
it covers. It's not just, you know, materials recycling, but it's also trash. So it addresses all that. And I don't know what
Yeah.
the feedback was when you met with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, they give you a template for an on-site recycling plan that's pretty extensive. And I think the contractor was originally thinking that it was just a large scale, you know, concrete recycling, but it's actually a lot more than that. And we still have to sit down with them and make sure that all of the different components are being recycled. So that's definitely a more intense one.
And I think this comes back to whoever the agency that the project is coming out of, having them on board and them at the table, you know, telling them, everyone working together. I think having a meeting with the contractor, the agency, and if there's a consultant or contractor or construction manager, having all of them on board and on the same page is incredibly important. And so I think then a lot of those questions and difficulties don't come up, you know, as much.
Right. Well, that's
Yeah.
like hearing CDOT's getting involved. That's the type of thing we would normally rely on standard specifications to put in the bid. You know, that the requirements for recycling and water use tracking and all that. You can just write a spec for it. But if you bring it up later, then that's where
Right.
it's an issue.
And I think that, you know, one other point out of today is that you don't have to follow a certain system, and that, you know, by maybe spending some time with these manuals, you can pull some credits out that may make sense for Fort Collins and include those in the specs and kind of make that the way that you do
Whether it's your own
business.
system or just incorporating those.
Well, and test them,
Yeah.
you know, and test them and have the dialogue with the contractor, and then maybe that could evolve into a system over time, you know, into your own kind of tailored system. So it can happen, it can happen in various ways. It can happen kind of organically, where you just kind of fold some of these into the process. something to think about.
When you talk about regional material, I'm just curious, let's say like concrete, do you track it all the way down to the chemical, the additive, the admixture, you put it in there?
If you
Where does the
do,
chemical
if you
come
do the
from?
maximum front haul distance one, yes. Which is
Which
why
is why
we did
it's, well, which is why it's 500 miles
Yeah.
instead of 50 miles.
But it becomes very difficult to start breaking down every element of a roadway project, so, yeah.
But our concrete, pure concrete, is from 50 miles, within 50 miles.
Yeah,
So
when you
Yeah.
look at the total cost, you're
I
not
think
breaking
that-
down concrete into all the different materials. It's the total, that's why option one seemed a much better fit for our project, because you're just looking at the total cost of
batching
concrete.
is probably going to be relatively close to your project.
Yep.
But maybe not.
Yeah, so.
I guess maybe to back up on Lindsay's question too, that our council actually passed an ordinance a few years ago on the building side. If it's a new city-owned building, they have to meet a LEED goal, I believe it is, over a certain square footage, I think like 5,000 square feet. So they're pretty aggressive on the building end. So yeah, maybe in time they're gonna look to something on the transportation and infrastructure end, but we haven't seen anything yet. And really, like I said, there hasn't really been anything out there except till recently. You know, LEED's been around for quite a while now, so.
And I think a lot of it that we ran into in Denver, like the warm mix asphalt, they didn't want to go into a project and use that as a test for it. And so I think we're noticing that a lot. And, you know, whether an agency or government decides to just take that on and give it a whirl, you know, I think those are some of the struggles that people are running into with projects right now.
Well, you could test innovative strategies over time instead of developing a system and trying to develop 20 innovative strategies on one project.
Yeah.
And maybe that's more realistic, and I don't think people are thinking about it that way. You know, there's just this infatuation with all these systems that are coming on board, and which system do we use, and you know, and which one will be at the top. When really, I think this is all about testing innovative ideas and then making that part of everyday practice. So I think we have to keep it in perspective.
Did you think the Green Road software favored asphalt over concrete or vice versa? Or no?
No.
No
it was-
favored?
Yeah, it really depends on what you plug in there. I mean, it really
Okay.
depends on.
Well, it covers so many different credits, from cool pavement to, I wouldn't say percent recycled,
But in terms of actual software, that we, like the real cost software
Oh,
and stuff, that was, I mean, it really depends on the different factors you put in there, so.
Do you think Green Roads could pump out an answer that says you're better off doing nothing versus making an improvement?
Probably not.
I doubt it.
That's a good point.
Well, like a widening scenario would be, you know, not like 14th Street where you have, where you add a lot of pavement, a lot of impervious area,
Oh, yeah.
a lot, add more traffic. I mean, those are more typical type of projects that.
And I mean, with those things, as you start to work through it, you're not gonna get the points. You're not gonna, you know, I think,
well, if the system's designed as it should be,
yeah.
then you shouldn't get extra points. I mean, one thing when I met with Peoria, Arizona, they were working on a widening project in the middle of nowhere. And they were anticipating all this future development. And for me, I was struggling with that question of, well, what are you really comparing this to? And you're essentially widening. They were going from 2 lanes to 6 lanes. They actually pared the project back to 4 lanes. And I'm seriously, the traffic did not warrant this, so I was struggling. But you know, I think if these systems are designed as they should be, then you're not necessarily rewarded on mega scale projects like that. It may not make sense, and that's just a bias I have as a urban planner. So. Anything else?
well, thank you for having us up here.
Yeah.
Good, thank
I
Thank
you.
like
you very
talking
much.
about this stuff, so. Like I said, we'll leave a copy of the presentation with Tim, and if you have any questions, feel free to.
And we also
email or call us.
have our business cards here if you
Yes.
have any questions that you think about, and we're always available for follow-up, and we're kind of learning as we go through these, and excited to work on it. And definitely PB as a company is not aligning ourselves with one system. We're kind of just intending to learn about them all and help folks through all of them. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.